we can see here in the OPFC, the Preparedness, Response and Cooperation Convention. I'm so sorry, but the speaker forgot his microphone. We're now going to be able to translate once again the full speech. Initially, preparedness, response, and cooperation regarding incidents that involve hydrocarbon pollution, and with the HNS protocol. With harmful substances.
This convention was made broader for different pollution products. I think that in Portugal we are not subscribers of the protocol, but the convention. I think the convention brings some procedures regarding pollution incidents or hydrocarbons. An accidental discharge must be recorded and it needs to be reported. That was the idea of the convention. The establishment of measures and contingency plans locally and regionally and transnational level also. A little bit like an answer to the incident of Amococadis. That was one of the first incidents in which this spillage went to the coast of France and the coast of England also. It's a system that has the commercial aviation that has a part, has a very important role to develop in this convention, which is the surveillance part. The plane, the crew that witnesses a spillage in the sea must report it, and there are specific procedures to do so. Regional systems, transnational systems. It is a convention that promotes international cooperation not only in the combat of pollution incidents, but also for the research of correction measures and the technical cooperation, bilateral cooperation in preparing and fighting this type of accidents. The convention is developed with this protocol that doesn't change in terms of substance, it just enlarges the application field, the HNS protocol, and it just brings the acting field to other type of substances. This enters in force. In Portugal, we started with the Clean Sea Plan with different degrees of responsibility. In the most complex cases, atomized and hierarchical. Recently, we had a simulation, an exercise, a drill in Leixões that showed different levels of responsibility, and within those levels, there are several participants. There is some difficulties in articulating all these entities. The Maritime Authority is the main authority here, the port authorities also, and local organizations that have responsibility on the civil protection scope. On the district and municipal perspective, if we are in an area that we have a different municipalities, we have a set of entities that are participating in this organism for prevention and combat to pollution situations. We have in category incidents in 4 severity levels, each one of them higher in terms of the person responsible of the actions to put in practice. On a lower level of the responsibility resides on a port authority and on the local maritime authority, and on a higher level, the authority is the maritime authority on the national level. It is mandatory to inform neighboring states from spills that may affect them. We had an example of the usage of this convention with the incident of the Prestige that reached our coast. The OPRC convention has measures about the way that it can be requested assistance to other hiring states to help fight a pollution situation. About this convention, LP and OPRC, I don't know if you have any questions. This is the one where we began, the London Convention for dumping of waste and other matter in the sea. We went to the reverse list. I didn't approach this theme before. All the constituents where are dredge materials, fish, ships and platforms, inert inorganic materials, organic materials of natural origin, generated objects in isolated installations without possibility of other forms of disposal. These are the sole materials that can be placed and disposed of in the sea. About the contracting parties regarding the London Convention in yellow and green, and regarding the protocol, I do believe that it's only the green one. In red, they are not contracting anything. So the state of ratification of the convention needs an universal scope, even the first one. Saw this before, the possibility of placing CO2 on the maritime seabed. There are two videos that I wish you would see following this training. One about the invasion of microorganisms. It has almost an hour video from BBC in cooperation with InBook. And this video and this website from an academic organization that is studying marine fertilizer. The intervention, which is a convention that is before MARPO and before the United Nations Convention for the maritime law, to bring the right of intervene in the pollution, even if it's outside their territorial waters, out of their intervention area, as long as that pollution accident can result in the contamination of the coasts. This is a perspective from the industry regarding maritime transport. The perspective of the industry and of the stakeholders also. These goals of reduction of the ecological footprint, at least the carbon one, of the companies, not only of transports, but companies that import or export cargo, that want to monitor all the path that takes the raw materials or the finished products since the production center until it reaches the consumer. All that has its brand needs to be traced. And from that traceability, that monitoring, most of them establishes as goal a great reduction of the carbon footprint. Obviously, these percentages, there is a serious commitment. It comes from a marketing approach. Usually, when we speak about 50, 60%, it's concerning a year of reference in which there was no concerns on this level. So this is quite easy to make this type of reductions. It's not exclusive for maritime transport, for the main stakeholder of the maritime transport, which is the carrier, the cargo. The cargo is more demanding in environmental perspective and to demand that those who relate with it, and transport is one of the ones that's more connected with cargo, needs to have an ecological footprint that's sustainable. Maersk is here with container carrier. It's the segment of the maritime transport with bigger quantity of emissions regarding CO2. These are estimates of emissions to 2050, keeping the state of the art exactly as it is. These predictions are always predictions and are based with a reference on the current values, projecting them to the future without a change in the state of the art. If nothing is done, meanwhile, those will be the values of the emissions in 2050 of the international maritime transport. What can we do? And there is technology to do it. First, reducing speed. Is it possible? Is it wanted? Is it economically viable? What can be the implications of the reducing speed? I bought a product for the metallurgy and the coke from Saldanha Bay up to here with a policy of reduction to make the emissions smaller. What are the implications regarding the economical sustainability of the business? As a storage room being in a ship or on the land storage, it's the same thing. If the cargo is in the ship, it is transactable. So the knowledge, as you know, can be sold anytime. Probably by themselves, reducing the speed has negative implications on the negative parts. They have to do with the predictability of scales. I want the products that I bought here in my storage unit on the day X because I have orders to sell them, or I have an assembly line waiting for them if they are raw materials. Where I can work a lot with reducing speed in segments of maritime transport where time is not that important, or when I have a network that allows me to have segments of the network of transport that walk to a superior speed without harming the final velocity and speed of the network. On these two levels, I can get the best of both worlds. I can have savings in fuel, I can reduce emissions, and I'm able to keep the efficiency of the business. That is the most efficient measure. It needs no technology, it's just for management. These are technology measurements that are available in the market today as tuning of thrust machines and cleaning the structure of the ship to reduce friction when they are in displacement. One thing that can be done is to free air bubbles in the structure. As you know, since the Titanic to Queen Mary, the development in terms of maritime navigation are we navigating faster? Same thing. In 100 years, of technological input, it was a round number for ships, 0. It's not depending on the power that I have available. It's conditioned by the environment, by the water. Water is an element that has a high resistance, friction, the movement of the ship. I can have small changes in that field. I cannot have great changes. 100 years of technology didn't help me. What we try to do, that lubrication of the hull, it's to withdraw the effect of the friction resistance of the water. It has been used commercially in suppliers, in ships, with very enthusiastic results. But there is no info about reliability of the system, if it breaks down a lot, if it needs high maintenance. What we know, because it is developed by a reference company in building thrust systems, is that the system works and it has some advantages in terms of increase of speed of the boat, but also decreasing the consumption of fuel and freeing CO2. What is being done also of cogeneration in the auto industry, it's very basic, like taking advantage of the heat generated by the friction of the braking systems. It's being done on board, taking advantage of that energy that it's dissipated of the heat. Part of that energy, when we feel heat from an electrical or mechanical source, the energy is being dissipated there. Sometimes it loses. In case of maritime transport, the use and the recovery of that heat, the improvement on the effectiveness of the tuning of the engine, the increase of quality on the autopilot can have an influence not on a short trip, but on the long trip in terms of consumption of fuel, in terms of emissions of greenhouse gas, and the meteorological routing, which is very advanced today because of software. When I was a sailor, I used to do this manually, but I would do it. Nowadays, it's very easy because there is software to do it, and on two different levels. First one, there is a higher frequency on the data supply of meteorological scope, and the same info are updated with a shorter period of time. And the software itself, the algorithm that it's working with mathematic models also is making this routing, and this can be changed exactly the same thing as the meteorological prediction is, using routes that are eventually longer in distance but shorter in time and less harmful for the navigation of the ship itself. Techniques, many of them on the conceptual domain, with not that many uses in terms of fuel consumption and CO2 emissions. Soft sails. Soft sails are sails that look a lot like the sails from the Chinese reeds that can have the mast in the center of the sail, and instead of having the canvas, it's a continuous canvas. Instead of having it from the top to the bottom, it has a series of reinforcement material. Regarding these ships, it has cane. Here, used for navigation, it has light materials that are extremely resistant. Rotors. In Lechouens, we have a ship that's here a lot of times. It uses a rotor system with difference of pressure caused by the action of wind on the rotors. I will show you some images. The kites. Kites is exactly the same thing of the kite that we use for recreation. Of course, it's the same in terms of operation. The dimensions are quite different. Regarding main propulsion of photovoltaic energy, there is no perspectives of being used in the propulsion context, but ships are not using energy just for propulsion. They have a lot of systems, auxiliary systems that need energy, electricity on board, a series of systems on board that need energy more than the propulsion system. Biofuels are an alternative also. One of the alternatives in terms of energy alternative to hydrocarbon that promise some applicability on a large scale consumption, not first generation biofuels that have been quite polemic regarding the food reservations that we have and the reserves that we have as humanity. But the third generation has no implications on this field So biofuel from, for example, from kitchen oils, it doesn't have the same type of competitiveness with the food chain that the human being has at its availability. The energy of waves through different techniques used in naval architecture, which is to prolong the hull using what is called an appendix on the front, on the back, that looks like the tail of a duck. And other are fins built on the scale of a ship that are moving and taking advantage of the energy of waves. As for the applicability of this energy, is very promising. It's not for bigger ships that need quantities of energy that are quite high. This is the prediction that we have in terms of biofuel. The ones above, that triangle there, are biofuels for second generation. It's a differentiating factor. One of the first things we saw here, we needed to know the gross tonnage of all the rates were calculated regarding gross tonnage. A series of ports are starting to calculate rates in function of the energy efficiency of the ships. The calculation is a quite complex algorithm. I'm not a mathematician, but there are several Excel sheets prepared for this calculus, or some websites that are doing this directly of the energy efficiency of the ship. Regarding what's within the energy efficiency of a ship, type of fuel, if it uses LNG, has a huge probability of being on the A list, the most efficient. The type of fuel it uses for the main propulsion, for the auxiliary facilities for energy production, the type of route in which it's navigating in. There are a series of factors that are taken into account to calculate the energy efficiency of a ship. This efficiency is translated also on the emission level that go into the atmosphere. Questions before coming to the social sustainability part?
If there are no questions, I'll ask some questions then. Still on solid bulk, on the Baltic traffic. From these energies or from these alternative systems, which one is more adaptable to a ship of 5 tons of dead weight that navigates through the Portuguese coast to a Baltic country? It's summer. Typical area with typical windy weather. Is it worth or not worth investing in it? You have to tell me. You are the ship owners. Or is it worth investing in a soft sale? Not necessarily one sale, of course, but a set of sales. You were saying? This was the first soft sale to be used. It is not a ship that sails exclusively with sails, but mostly with it. It has motors, 2 of them. But it was built without the construction technique of sail. It's a yacht. It's a yacht with over 80 meters long. It's the length of many ships who come here to Liechtenstein. It's a concept that it's been navigating for 10 years. It has some followers in terms of passengers, ships, indeed. One of the advantages of this system is the sales orientation. It doesn't give any work, really. Everything is done starting at the deck. This was the idea. It hasn't been doing any retrofitting until now. It's been using this system since it was built. Is it or is it not viable for a dodo max? He thought about it. The ship owner thought about it. It has telescopical maps. Ideas. Just an idea. This is the one of the reduction of frictional resistance. It was developed by Mitsubishi. It's only available for suppliers right now. And it uses the permanent lubrication of the mast. Another idea that is being developed is the idea of moving ballast. It has 2 advantages. It manages to go around the convention of BWM, ballast management. It gives more energy efficiency and it reduces the consumption of fuel. This is the ferry that already exists in Northern Europe, and it's only electric energy. It's 80 meters long. We start using hybrid propulsion as well for these other ships. The kites, the rotors, the ones we have here in Leixões do have this rotor system. Solar sails are a concept, they're just an idea, they don't have any kind of practical applicability for now. Is it worth or not investing in a kite ship from here? Four pillars of maritime regulation. The first one is SOLAS, saving of the human life at sea. The second one, the STCW, how maritimes are formed. The third, MARPOL, how do we protect the environment. And the last one, the most recent one, MLC, from 2006. The three first pillars come from the IMO. The last one comes from the International Labour Organization. This organization is an organization of the United Nations, but that existed before the United Nations. The International Labour Organization was formed after the First Great War. So it already has quite a great history compared to the United Nations. It has, just out of curiosity, some conventions, some resolutions that were prior to United Nations and to the Great War that nowadays seem to us out of time, which is the case, for example, of the prohibition of night work for women. It's one of the first resolutions of this organization. It dates back to the 20s. Within its time, it was an organization that has tried to mold the way that work relations were organized at an international level. The MLC convention, it wasn't formally signed by Portugal yet. It was approved by the Republic Assembly, and it was approved unanimously. So it's just waiting for the development of the diplomatic issues for Portugal to be included as a member of the MLC 2006. The principles of MLC 2006, it's a basis that is very similar to what we can see nowadays in certification systems in terms of social responsibility. I don't know if, well, in our company we have no reference in terms of social sustainability. I don't know if among the people who are here present, does anyone have in his company such a system? There are some. Even here in Portugal, we have our very own standard in terms of social responsibility. The one that is most known and used at an international level is the SA 800. It has to do with a North American NGO, and it can be certified. There is a ISO reference that is the 26000. But all these references want to recognize some basic principles that comes in fundamental principles as well. For example, freedom of association and the effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining, the elimination of all forms of forced or compulsory labor, the effective abolition of child labor, the elimination of discrimination regarding employment and occupation. These are all concepts that seem secure to us for over a generation. However, in maritime labor world, that was one of the first work areas to be globalized, if not the first, maybe. These are principles that are fundamental, but that are not always taken into account. The option of these values, these are values, not political options. These are universal values, and they are just starting being consecrated in the world of maritime work. Until then, there's been a great difficulty implementing these conventions. It's one thing to produce and to adopt this convention. We have first to write it down and make sure that the context is approved by most of the members of the International Organization of Labor. Then we have to make sure it is approved, that it comes into force. And finally, and it's usually the part that is more complicated, after each state makes the regulation in its own country, how are we going to put this into practice? This depends on the internal legislation of each state. How are we going to apply this one to verify its applicability? The verification of MLC 2006 is within the port state control. We have tried to see what it is, and it starts with the verification of this legislation. Only later, and with Amok Cadiz, as it started including the part of verification of other conventions of the ship that don't always have to do with the labor part. But the port state control always begins with the verification of the labor legislation. This control, as you know, nowadays applies all over the world. It started in the 80s. The U.S. Coast Guard did what it does nowadays. Port state control. It was the first organization at a local level to intervene in ships without harboring their flag, to verify conditions of safety and the verification of these international conditions. The Paris Memorandum has somehow continued this work and started establishing at a European level among the state members the kind of verifications of ships that weren't theirs. And nowadays, the Paris Memorandum has a series of replicas at an international level. It has a memorandum for the Caribbean, for Latin America. Canada is actually a member of both of two memorandums, the Memorandum of Paris and the Memorandum of Tokyo as well. And the port state control, that is the capacity of the port to intervene and verify the controls in ships that do not harbor their flag, has been established almost at a global level, and it has then to be verified by the port. MLC introduced a notion that is even more advanced of what is the responsibility of each participating state. Here, each state can intervene at three levels. It can intervene within what is the legislation of ships that harbor their flag. They can intervene at a third level as well, although it's the area that is most difficult to apply. They can intervene citizen that resides in the country can verify the work conditions that he has in a ship flying a foreign flag. This plus area is quite difficult in terms of applicability, but the concept applies. There are 5 fundamental chapters. There's a set of rules or articles that are quite large, that are mandatory. And the way to put in practice these rules depends on every state, although the convention has some guidelines. But these guidelines are not mandatory, are not of mandatory compliance. There are 5 main chapters. They're quite similar to the way the SA 8000 is organized. The first title establishes the admission requirements, that is to say, who can work aboard the ship. It forbids. The SA 8000 has a reference about child labor for people under the age of 15. Here, child labor, although except if national legislation gives a higher mandatory age, here the minimum working age is 16 years old. Between 16 and 18 years old, the workers have some sort of special protection. There are some tasks that they cannot carry out. For example, they cannot perform night labor. So they still have some special protection. Of course, they lose the protection that they have with SA 8000 that makes it mandatory for the employing companies to create conditions for them to be able to stay at school and continue their educational process. They have to have a medical certificate. It already was mandatory according to the national legislation to have the certificate. What is mandatory now, or at least I don't recall taking one aboard, is that they have to be English. The medical certificates have to be in English to be verified by any state. The person has to have some training and qualification for at least maritime frameworks. Although they're here included in MLC 2006, it applies to everyone who works aboard. It doesn't matter if they have a maritime profession or not. Recruitment and placement processes. As we all know, most of the private companies, mainly, in terms of a maritime placement or other professions, these companies generally work with an honorary status for people who hire and really for people who are hired. And it is mandatory so. The recruitment services can't have any cost for the maritime worker. They're all free. The employment contract has to be put in written and has to be in English. It has to be available to the inspectors of the state member. It has to be explained to the maritime worker, and the employing company has to give the worker a period of time during which he can solve in a voluntary way the employment contract. So there is a reflection period for him to see if he wants to adhere to the contract. He has a period where he can think about it without any indemnization. He has some hours of work and rest. It exceeds widely what are the working timetables that can be applied in terms of certified social responsibility. It is mandatory to have holidays, 2.5 days paid vacation, and it's the first time that this is mandatory in terms of international rights. So they have 2.5 days of paid vacation for each month of work. Repatriation guarantee. There must be a bank guarantee in that sense, which means that the ship owners and the ship managers or the charterer have to give a bank guarantee to prove that they have the financial capacity to repatriate the worker if it is necessary. Compensation for sinking. This already existed in another convention that was never signed. And this part that is much more difficult to implement, that is mandatory for the ship owner to have a career program on board to create opportunities for the maritime worker to develop their skills, to increase them, and to have access to other functions aboard that are not the functions for which he was initially hired. They establish accommodation and leisure conditions. The accommodation part already existed in another convention, although it didn't have the signatures that it needed. The port state control has been during the last years, in terms of public opinion, has been directing its inspections to different areas that are not the well-being on board and the quality of the onboard accommodation. It establishes quite well established conditions. That is the space that each crew member should have, the luminosity, the natural light that it must have in the cabinets. It establishes all these accommodation parameters that were not quite well established before in the previous convention. There are also food and table service parameters, minimal requirements in terms of food. Regarding the salaries, going back to the second title, just to make a little comparison with the SA 8000, here there isn't what we call a minimal wage of subsistence. The value of the wage is completely open. It's mandatory, of course, to follow national legislations that can establish some references in that sense, but the value is open, contrary to the SA 8000 that has an index to calculate in each country what is considered as a minimal wage of subsistence. And for companies to be certified, as you know, here in Portugal, the first company to be certified was Delta. There are already, not a lot, but there are already quite a good number of companies with that referential, and when it comes to wages, they have this reference. Here, it's not the case. Health and social security. In terms of accommodation and leisure, we'll have to To translate this into conditions of leisure, the ship has to have books, videos, games. There must be something on the ship that the crew can access as a leisure activity during their free time. This convention will also establish this need for the ports, which means that each port will also have to have at the disposal of the crew of the ships leisure facilities. It doesn't have to be a health club. It can be just more modest leisure facilities, but they have to be there to offer something to the crew when they arrive at the port. Medical care, liability of ship owners, although this part was already quite well covered in other convention flags. Protection of health, safety, and accident prevention. All these are areas as any other certified text where we have to prove and have evidence that these things happen on board. Access to onshore facilities and social security schemes. In this case, the International Labour Organization has always recommended that one of the compensations that should be given to maritime workers should be, at least for what is the age to stop working, to have some precocity. In the 40s, there was some integrations of the United Nations in this organization, and we ask that maritime workers should retire starting from their 60s, and a tendency was suggested to diminish this age to the 55 years old. This convention gathers around 60 instruments of regulation that the International Labour Organization had, and it gathers them all in one text to make it easier to be signed. For the establishment, for the implementation, it instaurs the country of registration responsibility, processes to certify the ships that already exist in several areas. For example, there are classificating societies, but there are also entities who currently work on other certificate references that might not be structural, like companies of control of environmental sustainability or social responsibility. They also can have the authorization to do this certification according to the MLC convention. So it establishes the responsibility of the states, and it makes it mandatory to have on board, and that each state should have. Each state must have a system for the crew members to be able to make complaints. Once again, it's not a political measure, it's a measure that is similar to the one that was proposed in Japan, currently in the new conduct code for the companies. It was proposed by the Japan government after consulting the companies, the workers, the society in general. The Japanese government proposed that each company should have a process, an internal process, a system that might allow all the co-workers to present a claim anonymously without being afraid of consequences for making the complaint. Of course, we're bringing this possibility here in the convention for the crew to be able to complain to an external entity. The environment aboard the ship is a closed environment with very small crews, and it's sometimes difficult to make complaints, and it's almost impossible. So it must be on land in each state, a member of this convention at least, especially through the port state control. It is mandatory to have this possibility to create a system, a process that might allow the crew to make these claims to complement these positions within the ship itself. It has something that the SA 8000 had, but who's not here. The SA 8000 makes it mandatory in the certification process to have, and also in the auditorial process, to have private interviews with the company workers. Here, this possibility is predicted, but only under one circumstance. The convention establishes that someone who has a specific health problems should also have a specific work that is adequate to his physical conditions. And the possibility of confidential individual interviews only applies to this circumstance, which means that the certifying entity can gather information in this way only to verify if this crew member has the possibility to have functions aboard that are adequate to his physical capacities and limitations. It's just reduced to this specific point, and it puts every other point that appear in the SA 8000 apart. It's the main information source to enable the certification process. We also saw the state of residence responsibility. So there's a set of articles, of rules. There's also a code. That's the certification referential. So there's a set of article and rules, and the code that is all the other text, the ISO 2001 that has a set of checks that can be certified with regulating support that might exist in a country or in a union of countries like the European Union, and that exists in terms of international in conventions. It also gives some guidelines that are not mandatory. Each state can adequate them to their own legislation and way of working. It establishes all these principles. Comparing it with the system of certification of SA 8000, SA 8000 makes it mandatory for each state to have a workers' representative. Here it is not mandatory, it's also a universe that is much smaller. We're here talking of tens of people, maybe. There are very little ships nowadays that navigate with more than 20 people, and 20 people, that's already a big ship and an exceptional case. We have here 68 regulation instruments, so 37 conventions and 31 recommendations. One of the reasons to adopt this convention is because the former conventions were too detailed, and each state had a legislation process that is very complicated until it could sign all the conventions, and so the number of actual signing was quite low. It introduces the concept of fair competition conditions, level playing fields. It doesn't allow me as a ship owner to compete with another ship owner based on work conditions for my crew who have less costs than the costs that has the other ship owner competing with me. I work with a different regulatory system that makes it mandatory for all the ships to work with the same basis. It's just a basis for a fair competitiveness that is the same for all. It also eliminates, answering to the comment that was meant yesterday, the possibility of flanging out to work with a system that is more favorable, that won't have that much charges. The flanging out causes an immediate inspection. When a ship switches flags and reaches a port, it is immediately inspected in terms of the obligations of each contracting state of the MLC 2006, because it is suspected that this flagging out might be to configure or to create disloyal competitiveness conditions compared with other ship owners. The stakeholders, their member states, competent authority, the state at these three levels, as port state control, as country of registration, and as a state of residence. A recognized organization can also intervene. I don't know if it can apply to other organizations that don't have a lot to do with the maritime world, but this will be an option of the regulatory authority. Ship owner and ship maritime. One of the verifications that is always done in the port control is to verify if the commander of the ship actually has knowledge of the dispositions of MLC 2006. And if he has aboard some archive where the work contracts of all the crew are available, and if he has an archive aboard where all the medical certificates of the crew are present, as well as their professional certificates as well. He has to be aware of this legislation. It has to have registration of the working hours of each member of the crew. This information has to be shown to the inspector of the country, of the port state control. If there's some system aboard that may prevene the state of fatigue among the crew, all this information has to be mandatorily shown and shared during certification controls, and it can be verified at any time by the port state control. Some of the measures that were proposed are this: the access to a free system for finding employment on board, the certification of recruitment agencies, which means that the companies that work in this framework and that hire maritime workers have to be certified to make this recruitment, and they have to prove that they do it and that they make it freely. Mandatory paid leave, access to a complaint system, regulatory need state. The convention is approved by the Portuguese state, but now we have to produce legislation to put it into practice. Some work has already been done. Even before the convention was signed, Portugal, because even signing it, the issue was already raised of ships flying our flag, visiting a country that could already be a member of the convention, and its quality of port state control could verify the ships. another of the innovations, the convention, is that the verification of the conditions that are in the MLC 2006 are mandatory. So each ship has to respect the dispositions of the convention, whether the flag that he's flying is part of the convention or not. So Portugal was not part of the convention yet, but had already the maritime capacity and authority to establish this conformity certificate according to the convention. Questions? A very quick question. This convention, it's the first time I see a presentation about it, and it has some news for me. And my question is to know that if, from the point of view of Porto, this convention considers that we're going to have another stakeholder, that is the crew member. If the port has this new guideline of creating facilities to help the workers, it makes us, and I mean the port manager, to see a ship not just as a ship, but also as a clear stakeholder of the port. Isn't there this important change in this level? The second question is to know whether the pilots, and here I'm asking this question to someone who's in the port every day, as a pilot, has it ever happened to you to be in a situation where you were in the presence of a crew that showed signs of difficulties and of alert in terms of food, in terms of hygiene on board? And if that's the case, what was the channel that you used to give this alert to the competent authorities, and how do you see the role of the pilot in this level? Regarding the first question, the crew member was already a stakeholder of the port. It just didn't have the authority until the convention came into force, but it was already an important stakeholder. Regarding the second question, it's part of our work in terms of the relationship aspect, because it has gained some weight from the moment we've started thinking about what's the crew, and not seeing all the members as separated people, the pilot, the commander. The relationship and the behavioral part, and most of the trainings that we've been doing lately has more to do with this behavioral part. This part of relationship with the people that are on board is very important, and long before the convention we already had this role to indicate to our crew the possibilities that they have on land to attend their needs. What I know in Portugal that exists currently, we have the Stella Maris. Although most ports also contribute to the viability and the economical sustainability of these maritime cases as part of the Stella Maris, there was already some intervention, not really in a direct way, let's admit it, but at least in an indirect way. So this convention here, all of this, what does it reinforce in in the maritime world and in the society. From my point of view, as operator, the main competences, the main skills that a pilot has to have is a situation conscience regarding a specific environment in which he is working. But he has to have a very high situation conscience. It's one of the main obstacles that lead to some competence and skill problems and mistakes. It establishes here some legal mechanisms, but it at least improves what is our situation conscience as people who work in contact with the crew of other ships who are the main object of this convention. Probably few of us have considered that these people might need these internal facilities in a useful way, at least. They're in an environment that isn't theirs. They're with people with different ways. Some of them are very far away from their family for several months. They're in a situation of great emotional fragility, not to mention other fragilities. So I think it's important for people who have contact with the ships to take these crews into account. For example, during the International Day of the Maritime, to make a little celebration in each port. In terms of concrete cases, we already had a while ago a case here in Leishange that was quite delicate. It was a result of a bankruptcy process from a company. Some ships stayed here with their crew. And the port of Leishange, the authority of the port of Leishange, PDL SA, in a free way offered some basic needs to this crew, and there was some accompaniment from the port as an entity, and there was some accompaniment. We pilots, for example, because we know their ways much better, we accompany them periodically, and we took care of them while they were here and accompanied them until they were sent back. Of course, there aren't lots of consulates here in the port for these circumstances. The first thing we do is sending them to the consulate of the country of origin of the crew. This is the usual process. What the convention introduces here is the possibility of existence of a local organism, because some countries do not have a consulate. The diplomatic representation is made through an embassy, and it makes the repatriation process much more difficult sometimes. It's going to give more visibility. There's not the obscurity that there was until now, and this problem is starting to appear in this part of the society that contacts with the ships every day. And we have approached the themes that were most important in these three areas: the part of the social responsibility, the environmental responsibility, the part of the economic sustainability of the companies. I think that we managed to at least analyze separately the three pieces of the puzzle. And what I would now like is for all of this to help us build the fourth pillar. The fourth pillar, it's this part of the situation consciousness that all these areas are linked together. They all interact together. This convention has some reflexes in terms of economical sustainability, and one of the most vanguard groups in terms of the shipping companies, where they accentuate references as Maersk. They give value to these entities that give us reference technology. There's some sort of think tank of the maritime transport industry, and one of the risks that has been identified at the beginning of this decade was that with this convention coming into force, the crews should win a new social consciousness and require higher wages and try to lower the number of workers to come to the fleet. It has given some contribution. It has been first identified as a menace, but I think that they turned it quite quickly into something that they consider an opportunity to have relationships on board that give an image of the company as socially responsible, but it has moved a bit with the industry. It had implications on the industry, and all these alterations of environmental changes changed the industry. It's the same with the think tank, with several initiatives that identified this permanent change of legislation as a problem. We don't know which legislation we're going to have in 10 years. And of course, it transformed once again a difficulty into an opportunity. Participate in forums, trying to be more and more present in terms of the International Maritime Organization, trying to be part of the regulation organization, try to establish calendars for its coming into force. All of this is interdisciplinary, and all of this is part of the sustainability of maritime transport. I modestly try to say that everything is part of the sustainability that we have to give to our own society. As a final note, these are relationships that are a little bit complex, these relationships that are appearing among all these areas within maritime transport. And being complex relations, and I being only a sailor, I have to confess that it's difficult for me to put them together. That's all. Thank you very much. More questions?
I hope this course has been pleasant somehow. Good afternoon, everyone. This will be a very brief session. We are at the end, but probably to give you some ideas. We are opening other ideas because we're bringing projects regarding sustainability. This is quite a conclusion. As I said here, we're leaving things in open. I'm a professor of the Nautical School of the University of Lisbon. Just a master's degree in port management that has ended now. So we are the course has ended. It will restart the following year. And so we have been approaching this subject, maritime transport and sustainability. I would like to. We don't have a lot of time because 1 hour is not much, but I would like to know the name and where are you coming from, just to know when I'm looking at you to know exactly what you are doing. My name is Francisco Skate. I work here in the Lisbon port. I have the responsibility of the boats and the tugboats also, and I have the marine machine course, machine accounts. I work here in the port in the area of hygiene and safety at work. Carlos Oliveira, I work here in the direction of our port operation and safety. Gaspar Lozini, I work here in the financial direction. I worked in the port of Viana do Castelo. I also accompany the pilot areas. That's why I'm interested in that subject. My name is Luis Cunha. I work also in APDL and I'm responsible for the equipment engineering and maintenance. My name is Vasco Almeida. I work in a company. I'm the technical director of transit. My name is Manuel Felgueiras. I work in APDL in the port of Viana do Castelo in the maintenance area. My name is Elio Figueiredo. I'm the ancient official of the Merchant Navy. I'm a pilot of the Franco Henrique Nautical School, and I'm working as a consultant, independent consultant for investment projects in different sectors. My name is Hugo Lopes. I work here in APDL, and I'm in the direction for works and equipment. Jorge Oliveira. I work in a traffic freighter in the area of navigation. Good afternoon, my name is Murilo Luz and I am working APDL for 2 weeks in the area of environment. Manuel Teixeira, I work in hygiene and safety at work. Okay, so we got to know one another, so you have very different areas, but you are addressing things that are very different also. What will be important for each one in their activity, but for the curiosity, opening other horizon, bringing new subjects. We will address environmental issues in maritime transport, ports, port cities, and environmental issues regarding them. I know we talk about port cities at the beginning, so we'll try to make this presentation lighter. We'll speak about main drivers and environment, what brings some of the transformation and the concerns that we have today, revolution in the energy world, have a presentation of focal importance of the energy, not only the technological of the natural gas and the question of the environment, but everything that's happening with energy. Why are these subjects on the table today? There is an environmental problem, but there are discoveries of natural gas, and this is an economic thing, economical and environment. These are two things on the table. With the recent development of natural gas and shale gas, and as I told you, the environmental drive to change the paradigm and the impacts that all of this has on all the subjects in all the maritime ports. having the opportunity to do so, I would like to tell you what is happening in the world of shipping with ships, dimensions of ships, and changes in terms of the energy, what's happening in the world today. I think this can be interesting. When we approach environmental questions, we are speaking about what? Many times of the matters. I know that you had classes, had training specific about standards, regulations, and in ports we will see that we have the specific areas to treat waste, emissions, and a series of matters connected to this subject, but we can see this on a broader level. When I had the Rio Plus 20 of the United Nations, a conference of the high level with the chiefs of state in 2012, IMO for the first time, and I want to debate measures regarding sustainability and eradicating poverty, but regarding the sustainable development, and IMO was invited to be present in this conference. And so to debate also the contribution of international transport to the three pillars of sustainable development, approach them, of course, economic, social, and environmental, and for the first time, they were present for the first time, were invited beyond the chiefs of state and the works that have accompanied the meeting, where they debated this subject. And when IMO itself has presented the vision for the development of the development framework of the maritime activities in Opera, we saw the importance of IMO itself on shipping and maritime transport about this subject. And so here, while we would recognize the importance of maritime transport on a global scale, it was the most efficient, recognizing the importance of the maritime transport in employment, social matters, but recognizing also for the questions of sustainability in which IMO can be concerned about. And departing from this, IMO has established as a commitment so that this conference was itself to focus its themes working for the sustainability of the sustainable development. That's the contribution of IMO. The most interesting thing is that IMO, when they acted the Rio Plus 20, what can we do? Process of sustainability, maritime transport, and IMO was needed, and they wanted to reflect, to debate about what is sustainability applied to maritime transport. What's sustainability after all? So it's not just emissions, it's not just consumption of energy. And this, as a bottom line, is what I want to bring you here. It seems interesting that IMO itself has decided, and it will continue to focus on the World Maritime Day to this subject, a great reflection about the theme of sustainability in maritime transportation system, and it's made a document for what would be meetings, the events on the Maritime Day. So they invited a set of experts and worked with their employees in a document that would be a concept of sustainability in transport. It was rethinking and decided that it was important subjects of the system of transport and the globalized world, the components of maritime transport, and would have board ships, people, officers, technicians, chain value, and IMO's roles in a sustainable maritime transportation system. Afterwards, they were to debate the concept of the sustainable maritime transportation system. They never did it before. So this document is interesting. It's available on the internet, and so you will have reference to this. You will not keep this slide. You don't have my colleagues. They give you the presentation because 1 hour is very short, and I will have to
with you in this hour. We will manage our time trying to talk about other things that you are more interested in. I will manage this session like that, but at the end, I will send you through Michelle, of course, not only the presentation, but a set of referrals that can be interesting to you. I want to tell them in this document that IMO has prepared. They identified the actions that would be necessary for the sustainability of maritime transport. So to define goals and actions, and in what areas? Well, the safety culture. Culture in maritime transport is part of the sustainability. Education and training. Education and training as a fundamental element of maritime transport. This is so important when this course happens in this context. The project TrainMoS, there was a project one. We in the university were within this project. We are in the second one now. And so we are departing from this concept. When we started the first project, it was to say these community programs was and measures for the development of the areas of the sea, but these were physical projects, ships, other projects that could contribute for the development. What we want, we as a university, companies, technological other partners will say that there is a reference to the human element saying that it's a fundamental element for the development of the highways of the sea. But organization, we apply to projects. This question of training is so much important today, as there is new things that are here and there weren't many of them when we started working. So it's not to be updated on what we do to do it better is has to do with new areas, new questions that didn't happen before. So technical questions or technological questions, the supply of gas to ships. And so there are some courses on the master's degree level or technical courses that have to do with these technical questions. How can we train people on the pier or operators to be on natural gas production? So technical questions in our mind. Areas that are here that are not in the past. So energy efficiency and also shipboard interface, these are important. Energy supply for ships, maritime traffic, maritime security, technical cooperation and innovation, new technology. We are applying this well. We could apply this to many of the navigation ships, to the single port window. All this debate of new technology, up until the questions, the financial questions of insurance, and all these things regarding the maritime transport and the governance of the ocean, and of planning the management of these subjects. Series of annexes where these things are detailed. So this is a contribution of IMO for our reflection for the sustainability in maritime transport. Here you have the reference. Here you have the document. If you look for it, you can get it on the internet easily. Another document that I think it's important here, and you spoke about the port cities, is the report about the competitiveness of global port cities. This is also a report from the OECD that asks a set of experts, many of them university members, technicians, academics, to debate, reflect about a technical document about the competitiveness of global port cities. And the idea is here. The impact of ports, benefits from ports, facilitators of trade, value-added employment, ports and innovation. Where do the impacts take place? At what scale? Let's see. Well, at different scales, micro and of the city, and the regional scale. And so this is important. Environmental impacts, land use impacts, traffic, right? That's generated traffic, traffic that's generated on the interland, the lanes, the routes that we need to ensure. Connectivity, maritime connectivity, even with measures to implement local benefits of ports. So this is a report with other questions as to mitigate negative impact of ports and proposals in terms of policy. So here you have the reference, also another document extremely interesting for those who are concerned about these matters. And here you have the reference, it's easy to find. So speak about port cities and some of the questions regarding the environmental issues. You have this map, you already seen it before many times. These maps are every time in the presentation. Every year I use the same map. There are 3 or 4. There are the maps that show, in fact, the flows, the main flows, the routes, and the density of ships. This is another one that shows exactly that. But what I wanted to tell you was these routes are not from the air, from nothing. They have an origin and a destiny. And these lines are physical flows of that come from a city to the other and from the other, and they will end up by departing like this. Behind the city like this, there is an hinterland and a country. In fact, sports city, in fact, are the intersections of the network that we saw and are fundamental elements on these intersections. Cities are also, we can see different ports, bigger ports, smaller ports. We debate many times the importance of the port itself, of course. When we see cities and territories, we see that each port is important on its own scale. Although a small port wants to be big, but it's true that smaller ports are important on their scale. Let's see different hierarchies of different networks, also knowing that the big ones control the flows on the world scale. They are in a superior hierarchy. So speaking about the great ports, we're speaking about the associated great cities of the world. So it's here that we concentrate also a series of flows that are not only physical. And so these are images of great ports of the intersection of the flows that we saw before. We are here in Leixões, of course, needed to have Leixões. This image has been throughout the world, I can tell you, and different traffic of merchants, of containers, of people, passengers just connected to Lisbon, to the great world metropolis, financial metropolis. They command a series of flows that are not just fixed flows. It's not just a container. Together with the container, there are info flows about the cargo that goes there, financial flows of banks, of insurances. And so these cities are cities that manage physical flows for a series of information flows that occupy top places in the hierarchy of cities on the world level. And many times we can see how it's difficult, but many times we can make it compatible, these great port areas, with the environment and with the surrounding spaces, with some quality from the environment. The cities, these port cities, and there are the nose of a global network of flows that we saw on the world scale. And I was telling you, can you see this? Can you see everything? Is it okay? These are physical flows of ships, of goods, because we need to have cities, need to have conditions to welcome it, routes, ports. Of connectivity to the hinterland, the economic flows, also commercial transactions on the world scale. And associated to these economical flows, we have services associated like insurance, for example, and other services that are provided. Stock markets, for example, in the past, great parts like Barcelona and other parts of Europe, where the stock market was, where the products were the stock market, the price of coffee was made there, for example, or other products, for example. And today it's the same thing, the financial question, banks, stock market, financial operations, and the subject of information, of course, is very important. Information is power, as we say today. we've been saying this for a long time now, not today, but the information that concerning commercial transactions, transport chain, to financial matches to all of this, right? And so these port cities have a fundamental role, a determining role on a global scale, right? These are top cities in the hierarchy of the city network. These are trade cities, business cities, which is the world trade and maritime transport, right? Associated with it is, I like to speak about this in classes when we have those wars between port and city, and we want to show that these activities are fundamental for the prosperity of the cities. What we need to do is, there you go, to work in terms of sustainability and ensure a conviviality that's better between the cities, ports, and traffic. Let's speak about other subjects. Accessibility, this is very important, the dimensions of the port itself. Of the multimodality, today we have demands that are quite bigger in terms of port infrastructures. Or in terms of facilities, of infrastructure that we need to have that will ensure all this movement from and to the port of cargo. They will place cargo in the port, and all of this represents, for the last decades, deep, great transformations of ports. And we are not just debating just the port space on the port, the pier, the terminal, the land place. We are logistical terminals that are gigantic sometimes in the port, or logistic platforms to support operations. Many times of added value on the goods to supply transport consolidation and deconsolidation that can be on the port area, next to the port area. For example, I was selling to the platform Barcelona, but can be inside the territories today many times, right? Good connections with ports. Today, I can say that port activity has enlarged its territory, and many times there is a series of functions and activities that are inside the territory, as long as they are well connected to the port. This will demand good accesses, good roads, good services. It's not enough infrastructure. We need to have transport frequency, reliable, and so we are witnessing an enlargement of the port spaces and their influence on activities. All of this will have influences on the territory, and this idea is important for us to see that the impact of the port activity of the maritime transport is not on the pier, on the terminal. Many times it is in harbor, and we need to work on this. Trucks, if we know that we should have infrastructure and services adapted to work for ports, but if we have an excess weight on the road, we'll have more trucks around the city. We will have more gas emissions, more noise, overcharge, over weight on the roads also. And so these issues are important to analyze. We are not speaking about the space of the port. When we have the port, this is port. No, that's not it. We are outside. We are feeling these effects, right? Port generates also these effects. So for the last 50 years, we have great transformations in the port spaces, not only in the parts of the general cargo, the small piers with storage units, as the terminals that we see that are gigantic, many times with almost machines who are robots. So they are controlled by computers that pick up the container and put them on its place and put them on a train, for example. These are huge spaces, huge transformation in terms of the morphology of the port itself, but also in spaces on the interland and interior of the territory. Greater demand in operators on the methodology exchange, importance of information that it's connected. So it doesn't work if there is no information. Another thing that is interesting that is happening today in the world of maritime transport is everything that is happening with the concentration companies. What we want and what we have today, there are ship owners that are bigger and bigger. They are joining themselves, joining one another. They are buying one another or mergers, or they are gathering themselves The capacity of cargo is concentrated in less operators more and more. There are great world operators that determine all the supply of transport. Is it possible to change to one of the other slides or not? Just very quickly, I'm sorry, I had something that I wanted to show you in a different presentation, and I will show you this very quickly just to return to this. I think there are people who are connected to this subject and the others. It's very interesting because they hear things that are different. And so, very quickly, what we have with OCD data is a strong growth of the market of goods. This will continue, and the growth of maritime transport companies, a tendency of the commerce of goods. And so this shows the importance of this mean of transport in the commercial transactions. This importance is shown here. What I wanted to show you is very quickly. These are the 20 biggest operators of container cargo. They are here, and the 10 bigger operators have 83.7% of the capacity of offering available. So these are 20 operators worldwide with 83% of the supply, but the 10 bigger ones, they represent 63% of the 17.8 million TEUs of capacity that's available. There are 10 operators only, 60-something percent. So this is very important for some of the analysis that we will do next. The 20 biggest operators have 83%, 84, okay? So this is the fleet of the 10 biggest operators of the world. So what has been happening is that there is a tendency of concentration of the market of the container cargo. If you see, the 10 operators have more and more and more supply of transport of containers. Let's go beyond this. What we see is that in 2014, the 7 biggest operators of container cargo represented. In 2014, they have 52% of the market, but to have 50% of the market in 95, we had 16 operators. So what's happening is that there are mergers, acquisitions, and there are less and less the ones that are dominating the market. These are the routes that we solve for. And this is the thing that I wanted to show you, which is it's not just a concentration on the level of the company and organization and supply. Am I speaking too fast? Great. The first ships, I know I speak fast, but they say it's okay. The first ships that have containers on it or have more than 100 meters in length, they have deals of capacity. We are far from it. We know that these ships have 400 meters length and they have a capacity of 18,000 years. We have one with 19,000, but we have orders that are superior to this. So this is the evolution of the ship. The ships are bigger and bigger, and they are bigger because of the economy, scale economy. We have scale economy, bigger ships. In 2014, the fleet they had 700 or 800 million, but there was a reduction of the number of ships. So we have, even in ships, we have less ships, but more supply, so the ships are bigger and bigger. So there is an increase, a continuous increase. If you see the capacity of the fleet, there is an increase in the dimension of the fleet of ships. So we have ships that are bigger and bigger because this brings scale economy for the ship owners. This will be interesting because we will say, well, okay, but here you go. There is a study made by this consultants, every consultancy, that the point of inflection of the economy of scale is about 10,000 TEUs. And in ships superior to 10,000 TEUs, the unit cost is higher of superior dimension ships, so the companies are buying bigger dimension ships. This is interesting because we are understanding that with the effect of the crisis of weight, we have less cargo and we have less transport. Sometimes the tendency is the one that we saw, the growth of goods, but in some traffic we have loss of cargo. So how does this make sense? Many times we have bigger ships operating, but the ships are not operating with the full cargo. And I will show you something different, which is strategy of the companies, of the operators, which is to diminish the speed of the ships. Although the ships can, I don't know, maybe I can show you a slide. Which challenges that this dimension brings problems to ports. We spoke about sustainability and what is the ability on the transport system on land to face all of this, but let's imagine the port infrastructures that are needed to welcome a ship like this with 19,000 containers or with 18,000 containers, a pier that's not needed, a terminal that's not needed, with cranes, with capacity to remove this very quickly. These ships are very expensive, they need to be working, they need to be navigated, and to be unloaded very quickly, so the port activity, the number of cranes, and the movements by minute, it's quite important. So this is selecting what we saw, which is the great ports on the world scale. These are even smaller and smaller. The number, they are less. Number of ports, these great hubs on the world scale. These are some of the limitations. Sometimes academics some time ago said that they started to establish limitations to the size of the ships. So this will stop at 14,000, 16,000, and they didn't. They are still growing and growing. And so we already know that this work of this academic work was put at cause because of their predictions. And now let's say it like this: there is another approach, which is to say that, well, maybe there are physical limitations to the growth of ships. It's not if it's possible or not to build, if it's profitable or not, or in operation, and how you make it profitable. There will be a limit that will stop for it to grow even more, and the limitations have to do with physical limitations to the increase of ships. Regarding if we see the great routes of east and west, and we have the navigation channels that next to canals, and we have the straight navigation. If it's ever in ports, we can improvise with a lot of money and a lot of investments in terms of the pier, of the deeper pier, of deeper waters. Is narrow, sometimes it's not possible to dredge, and so it's possible to see that probably we will be able to stop the ships about 22,000 TEUs, which is when the draught of these ships about 18 meters. It's not possible to dredge some of the narrows where they go, some of the canals. It is that we will see there the great ports of Asia can have 22,000 TEUs per hour on a ship. One hundred and three movements an hour, and the question of productivity is fundamental, even in this game of ports, which are the great ports, and in this ranking of ports. What we see is the great Asian ports are dominating the ranking. Another thing that's very interesting is that if you want to see what is going to happen in the world regarding the great routes and the maritime transports, police try to understand where the Chinese are participating, where are the Chinese buying or have port concessions or have participations, have shareholding on a port, on a terminal. This will give you very perfect and precise information about what's happening in the future regarding the world routes, great ports, and the routes that will take place. So these are orders. What you can see very quickly is that ships with more than 3,000 TEUs are equal. After 2017, we have 101 ships ordered. Most of the ships are ships 5,000 and 7,000 TEUs, with a variation of 7%, but then we have above. The greatest variation is on the ships higher than 13,000 TEUs. And so with the capacity for 18,000 TEUs, Maersk, CMA, CGM, new ships in order of great dimension also. 3 of them are superior to 6,000 TEUs. Let's leave this by now. I wanted to tell you this before getting back to our initial presentation, which is what I told you before. This seems like a paradox. How can we fill all these ships with cargo when, in terms of economical perspective, there was a decrease of the maritime commerce? Well, ship operators will have strategies for to diminishing the velocity and diminishing the speed and the velocity. They will have the capacity of offering it 2 or 3 days to get to a port or a week, and now it's 10. This means that we will have less frequency on that route, so we will have less offer. But when it made a part, it made scale economies on one trip when it took all the other containers. See? So what we will have here is, to be truthful, is that if you were to see in terms of this lowering of the speed, we were able to save 36 tons a day according to the velocity we decrease. At the end of the journey, this is very important, and that's how they can bring some profitability with these big ships, winning more money. The idea is to win more money. So they will have different levels of speed. What they did was diminishing the velocity throughout the time with the crisis. Then, when it was necessary, they have 3 levels of speed that are very significant regarding the velocity of the ship itself. But this is economy, nothing more, is to adjust the supply to the demand. So not the dimension of the ship, but the frequency and the diminution of the capacity of transportation in one line. If we have less ships on that line, we have less capacity of transport at the end of the month or the year, right? And with this, they are able to be more effective. These are decreases in the speed. They will not lose a lot of time in this, of course. The reduction in the available capacity associated with a great increase of time in the trip. These are some of the things that are here. 1.3 million kills without touching ships, just a minute, just decreasing the speed. Maybe we can change to the other slide. Please, I will ask for your help again. And maybe we'll have to return to this for one last time. Just because the other is in English, and because we will have people, other colleagues watching this, so give my regards to them, and we will have the slides in English because it's nicer for the ones who are, for people who are seeing English. Yeah, it's quite late in some of the countries, but many of you are still here. This is the capacity of the ship. The tendency for bigger ships to have 18,000 TEUs is a ship of 18,000 TEUs. It was reclassified for 19,000 TEUs. The companies know it's like that are marketing. They have a bigger ship. How is this made? This is made by adapting some space on the deck for more containers and many times empty containers. This is important, but they allow that instead of having 18,900, they have 19,000. The ship is the same, but with the arrangement on the deck, we can put empty containers, but the capacity, it is indeed higher. 18,000 TEUs from my ears. We can go forward here. This is one more image that is interesting of the ships. This gives you an idea of what is the shape of this in ports and the impact that it has on the navigation canals, on the terminal of the port, and the infrastructure of the port that needs to adapt itself to all of this. It's not just to the ship and the navigation canals, the maneuvering basin, but the machinery, the equipment that is needed in order to operate very quickly a ship like this and to remove the containers or put the containers quite quickly in order for the ship to set sail. And we spoke about port cities, ports and navigation. Many times I have a tendency to speak about port and maritime transport. Different people, one more on the port, other more on the ships. But everything that's happening with the ships has to do afterwards with ports and what is happening with the interline of the ports. So we will return to the natural gas subject, and we will finish this session with the natural gas. Speaking about sustainability, it's environmental subject, social ones, as I said in the beginning, of the employment, training, empowering, training, education. And this is an example of what's happening here on this training today with you here, something that we are not addressing enough, which is the subjects of heritage, of culture, of heritage, of maritime, of the city, of the port city. Heritage that can be material or immaterial, tangible or intangible, regarding the questions of ports themselves and of these territories. And so today we are giving each more and more value to the heritage also, and they're associated with sustainability of the city itself, of our values, of our culture, of our specification and specialization, and the competitiveness. But we need to be specific, we need to be specialists. We are better if we are unique. We are never unique, but we are able to be more specific and different from the others. Competitive, of course, this is mandatory, but we need to be specific, we need to be unique, we have more value that way. So this significance, this specification has to do with our culture, with our value, with heritage, cultural heritage, tangible and intangible heritage also. And that's why today in port cities, many of the planners, of the managers, of politicians, of technicians are concerned more and more with immaterial, with intangible heritage. Even in port culture, there is a very interesting book regarding the soft values of the ports. It was a book that when it came out, it was mentioned a lot. It was a reference that spoke about these intangible values, about the importance of keeping them together, of valuing them when we work at ports and port cities. Most of the people who are here, or maybe most of you are from Leixões, General Castelo also, but are from here. The port itself, we can see some examples, some funny examples that can be worked here. The passenger room that was referred to, it's a very interesting space of the Port of Leixões. It's very interesting. We will have the inauguration of the new passenger room, but we have another one as a terminal, a multi-plural space. But this was to preserve the heritage of the port. But there is one, maybe two. One of them had an accident, I don't know, when they were trying to pick it up from one side to the other to maintenance the pier. The two titans of the port of Leixões are associated to this port. The book of the port of Leixões, it has its titan crane on the cover. But there is a lot, there is, of course, I spoke about this, these are the ones that I have in memory, but these has to do with historic and intangible heritage, but we could bring the intangible, and also these matters are fundamental when I'm speaking about sustainability. There is another subject here, which is the environmental, and that have to do with the new culture, a new attitude, the environmental. I mentioned we had ecological concerns with the environment that we have around us, with the landscapes. On the other hand, we have law enforcement. There was a focus on this. We have standards, national and international ones, that are well defined about this. This is what you were debating this afternoon, right? And so this brings us to have more concerns and to be more rigorous with concerns about the environment, landscape, ecology, also in the ports. And we have inside the ports, they are a mix, an amazing example on how to work regarding environmental management, environment protection, regarding their rules, directives, their procedures. And so I will not address this because this was very important, but of the international regulations and the port procedures, we have more and more procedures and more demands about the ships. For example, today ships on the past, I have a collection of images of ships I used in my classes, the ships that were sending smoke in the port. They needed to have the machines working to have energy on board. Today, they cannot have the machines working because they would be polluting the city because of the emission problems. So the port needs to supply energy to the ships in order for them not to have the machines working. And so all of these are the subjects or the waste subject in all these matters, of course. Another fundamental question that is regarded to sustainability is the subject of the impact of the climate change. Port infrastructures are infrastructures that are highly exposed to climate change also, and therefore they are highly exposed to it in the sense that we could identify here several factors. First, they are on the front line next to the water of the territory, and any rise of the sea level will affect its infrastructures. Of course, it's true that there are several port cities that have begun making serious studies about the impact of climate change in the port and in the port city. And if you were to look in the internet, if any of you needs to search for these studies, or if you are curious about it, if you look for it, you will see there are several port cities that have many studies made already about which is the impact on the long term of the effect of climate change. It's interesting that we associate the effect of climate change to the rise of the sea level. It's what we address more. So in the limit, we could have the flooded ground levels. We can have the height of the pier. This could bring problems to the ship in terms of the level of the height of the pier. But we have also some studies, and there are several ones who are available on the internet. There are subjects that are fundamental here. Because, for example, you know that with climate change, we are having more and more extreme situations. So we have days with a lot of wind and days with no wind at all, days of low temperature and days with high temperature. We have great differences concentrated in time. The problem is that they are stronger and they are concentrated in time. This brings problems to some ports, and so they are identified on the subjects of climate change, the rise of the sea level. This is a problem that ports need to study. It's not a problem for tomorrow, but it needs to be studied and to be thought about. Having measures that can mitigate this. And the other has to do with equipment itself, the effect of storms in port equipment, the effect of winds, of floods. And it's not only storms and cranes, it's the effect of the sand themselves, of the dust that come from the wind that in the port equipment have effects and on the erosion that they have. And so all these effects are identified, are assessed in some port cities. There are some interesting reports on it, and so this is another interesting subject when we are addressing sustainability and the future, what we need to be concerned about. Is it for tomorrow? It's not, but we need to start understanding this today because the port infrastructures are planned and all this works and all these great investments with some time.
With this, there are other logistical questions, of course, of information management, for example, and so the supply chain that has to do with all the transport chain. We spoke about the PSW. I think you spoke about it already, so we're not going to lose more time with it. The information question is central, and of course, the question of the energy. So new energy sources, the questions of the low emission areas in Baltics, for example, that are now extended to other parts of the globe. Speaking about this, you spoke about all this, so we're not going to lose more time with this. What is happening now in the world of the energy? We speak a lot about the effects of this, but it's good to go back a little bit and try to understand what's happening and what contributed to these changes. Of course, the transports are great consumers of oil in terms of consumption, but also in terms of gas emissions. We're going to skip all this, and all we see today is, of course, a revolution in the world of energy. We see this in America, and there's two things. First, techniques of gas extraction that helped us to explore great areas at low cost. So this natural gas has indeed a cost that is much lower than oil, and so it allowed America to have very energy with a very low cost if we compare it with Europe, for example, or with Japan. And so this allows a greater movement in America, of course, and this has consequences also in terms of navigation, and I would like to take you here. So what happened with natural gas? If you see the story of energy, it's a story of wars. It's a story of fights among companies, and now of geostrategy questions, geopolitical questions. What we saw now is that there is indeed the emergence of a series of new areas, the areas associated to natural gas. What's interesting here is that these geographical spaces are not the traditional spaces of oil in generic terms. This is going to make some alterations in geostrategical terms. At a world level, we have here the main basins of natural gas with the main world reservations. There are lots of geopolitical exchanges. We're not going to lose time on this now, but the track should be working here, and there are here main changes in the world of maritime transport, in the world of energy that have to be done, and that will have an impact in the world of transport. There's here an important question. It's quite old, but it's still very interesting, and it says that the Stone Age did not end for lack of stone. And the Old Age will end long before the world runs out of oil. It will end because if we see everything that we've mentioned before, we said that oil was going to finish, that there was a problem with reservation, but we've been discovering more oil reservations with higher exploration costs. But the truth is that there are other energy sources now that, in economical terms, are much more profitable. We have here the problem of sulfur emissions, and we have here the problem of lowering these emissions levels that contaminate the air, the atmosphere, or also the bottom of the ocean. And we have to, as you were told, the Baltic that had great contamination issues. Did you talk about it? It's basically established that the Baltic was highly contaminated with sulfur, and so they had to lower these pollution levels, and these are areas of reduced emissions levels, and so we need to have fuel that has lesser levels of sulfur. We're speaking here in terms of sustainability, but appeared also the problem of the industry and of its competitiveness and of a concurrency that had to be established. We can use different fuels. Some need to use more expensive fuel. The several governments and international agencies have been trying to work in the sense of enlarging the areas of lower emissions. And we're going to see a picture here where these areas of emissions, I'm going to skip. These areas of lower emissions are enlarging to other areas of the globe, and the tendency is for these areas to arrive to other ports and to other regions. We have here two questions that are fundamental in terms of maritime transport. Speaking about maritime transport now, not because we're not going to move to natural gas for an environmental reason, but it's a conjugation of environmental and economical aspects. On the one hand, we have environmental questions that make us take decisions and to have measures that are more environmental friendly, that are less polluting. And on the other hand, we have the availability of new energy sources that are growing in terms of volume and whose exploration is more economical compared with other energy sources. This is not just an environmental question. These two questions bring us to be able to speak today to natural gas and methanol and others. There's always one that will be considered as the great fuel at a global scale, but there are other solutions, sometimes regional, and companies that work in regional markets that prefer methanol, and each has its own solution. So there's here two questions that are the environmental question is responsible for 90% of the global goods movement, and so it's a fundamental component of international trade and maritime transport. It produces 4% of the CO2 emissions, but when we analyze in terms of emissions by ton transported, it's the most environmentally friendly means of transport in terms of emissions of CO2 and greenhouse gases. With this new transport, all these emissions, the provision is that they will increase significantly, and especially with some specific cases like the Baltics and other cases with serious problems in terms of pollution associated to the use of these fuels. We have here the nitrogen dioxide and sulfur oxide that are very dangerous, very harmful in terms of emissions. And these emissions are predicted to grow by 10 to 20% on major maritime routes. And so we had to take measures for this. And in 1973, the International Maritime Organization approved the MARPOL agreement that predicted the reduction of these emissions and the control of these emissions, where the ships must have sulfur levels that should be lower in the fuel, and so they have to work with more refined fuel, but it's an extra cost for the ship owners, and so the ECAs and the SECAs appear first in the Baltic and in the United States, but we predict that they're going to implement themselves in the Mediterranean in other areas. And we've been testing, and this year is another important year. We've been trying to diminish gradually the quantity, the amount of sulfur in the several fuels. So it's been decreasing. We're having fuels that are less and less polluting, and what we have nowadays is indeed ships with fuels that cannot operate in the areas of controlled emissions, and so we have a greater demand for other energy sources, especially less costly, and we have here a very large fleet, and we also have the emergence of natural gas has revolutionized all this. There are here fundamental questions. There's the constatation that natural gas can be very important in the future of maritime transport, and there are several ways of implementing it. Order new ships with new motors with natural gas, try to work in diminishing these emissions, try to work with fuel that is more refined, but it's much more expensive, and we can also adapt existing ships with filters so that the emissions wouldn't be so high. All of this is being studied and with the operators, and what we've been understanding is that there's already some ships operating with natural gas. There's indeed a fleet that has been ordered in shipyards, especially in container ships that are mixed ships that operate with fuel and with natural gas. And we have lots of ship owners that are waiting and operators that are waiting to see what happens, because there's a great increase in adapting the ships to work with natural gas, but it also requires much more space than fuel, because in terms of the quantity that is used, and so it's going to require more space on the ship. It's going to have to be supplied many times, and so there's a global network that is not ready yet. And the operators look at this knowing that they have to follow this situation. There's a question here that is fundamental, is that the ports have to be proactive. They have to start working today for what's going to happen in 10 years. They're not going just to realize in 10 years that they need natural gas. The ports are thinking about it. The great entities are thinking about this. The European Commission also, there's a directive of the European Commission, it's the directive of big infrastructures that points to great natural gas networks in Europe and says which ports should have these facilities and establishes the timings for these natural gas aspect, and the ship owners start transforming their ships as well. So there are more and more ships working with natural gas. We imagine that it's going to be easier to install it in cruise ferries, offshore platforms, general cargo ships. So there are here some ships and some embarkments that there will be easier to adapt. A recent fact last year was a company that was the greatest world exporter of natural gas, an Arab company that bought a company of container ships, and the first thing that they did, the Azak, an Arabian company, and the first thing they did was of the 8 ships that they order in shipyards, they wanted all these ships to be able to work with natural gas. So we're going to have great container ships operating as well with natural gas. So some things are happening that indicate that it's going to be very faster than what we have hoped. We have here some limitations in terms of sulfur here. So this passage is going to be much easier, taking into account the port, technological questions, supply questions, also questions about international standards that have to be defined in terms of machinery and all these questions related to natural gas. I'd like to finish with this image. I had much more to tell you, but we're going to finish here to be on schedule. This shows you the natural gas network, the ports that will have this supply. Some of them already exist, others are predicted. We think that this is a distant idea, but it's already happening. Sometimes there are small situations that show us that there's a step that is being taken quickly as we imagined, as I said to you before. But we have here infrastructures that are already working and others that are built and others that are simply predicted. And lots of ports are looking at this in a more proactive way, thinking about working and providing this natural gas. Remember that the carbon ports were the main ports of navigation a few years ago, and so now the natural gas will maybe diminish the capacity of some ships, but every port is looking at it in a different way, and the ports of the main network with natural gas will establish a timing to see when this change will happen and what the consequences will be. The idea here is for you to live this training and to go explore a little bit more these things. I couldn't tell you everything I wanted to tell you, but I think you got an idea. I think I enlightened you a little bit, and I connected some of these materials. We spoke about some new materials, some new ideas. We're really at the limit of the time that was given to us. I don't know if you have any questions you might want to ask. I know that at this time of the day you just want to go home. You've been here all day. I thank you for the attention you've given me. I'm available for any question you might have. I will give you the presentation as well as some bibliographic references. And if you need anything through Magellan, I'm at your entire disposal. Congratulations for this training. I hope it was worth it. I know that all the classes went very well, and I wish you all the good. I just wanted to ask you for a little moment. We need you to fill in a questionnaire for the project. It's something very quickly. I'd like to thank you all for being here. Also, to thank the people who have followed us via video conference, and I hope to see you in September and October for the trainings that will follow in this project, and we'll give this information to all the people who are registered. Thank you very much.